Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. In this episode, joined by Charlie Greene, and I'm excited to get into a little bit of his story because it's interesting. Number one, and number two, the product that or the company that he's created is even more interesting. So I'm excited. Charlie, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Tell me. You don't have to tell anybody else. Everybody else, stop listening for now.
All right.
Just tell me. Yeah, tell me what was this catalyst that got you into this legacy heirloom sort of feeling that you started a business that helps people keep that.
Yeah. Thank you again so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. For me, everything that we're doing with the company Remento that we're building, it stems from personal experience. Having in my own life come to realize the value of having more deeper, sustained connection with those that we care about by way of taking the time to capture and preserve the memories of those we most love. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about my experience, but it was an experience that catalyzed exactly the product that we're building today. So personal experience is exactly what has driven us to build something that we believe can actually improve the lives of those that would ever take the time to use the product.
So what was that? I mean, I was looking back at a little bit of the couple of things that you've done. I mean, speechwriter, you were in the White House with President Obama. You've done a couple other things that are, I would think, especially for, and I'll just say it, a young man, to be around that, to go, whoa, there's something bigger here than, am I going to get beer tonight or am I going to watch Netflix?
Definitely. Well, I've still definitely made time for both of those things in my life, but for me personally, I've had the benefit of tremendous privilege as it relates to career and professional opportunities. So much of that privilege, I think, stemmed from growing up in a family where storytelling was so much a critical part of my upbringing. My dad, about 6 weeks before I was born, went out and bought one of the first handheld video camcorders. And he and my mom used that thing to record what felt like just an absurd number of hours of my childhood. And I think so many of us have people in our lives who are the first to bring out the cameras. And I think for many of us, we roll our eyes at those people. But in my case, it was in the years after my dad passed away, just after my 10th birthday, that we came to realize how incredibly special all of that video content was. And what was so amazing as we went back and watched that content, was that as wonderful as it was to have all of the milestones captured, the births, the birthdays, the graduations, and the recitals, actually what was way more meaningful was the serendipitous everyday encounters that actually captured a piece of his personality in such a special and profound way. And so often those videos were actually his stories. So for me, I learned very early in life the power of story, and it's been a realization that has followed me across my personal and professional career, whether that was writing speeches, trying to build a business around storytelling, or just trying to foster more deep and intentional and purposeful relationships in my personal life.
How did you take that passion and turn it into a business? Because a lot of people have passions like that, but then they never really see the big picture of, whether it's helping someone else solve that same problem, selling a product, whichever way you approached it. How did you make that leap?
I mean, the company that we're building right now with Remento, it's based on an experience that fundamentally changed my life. So 5 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And we realized that there was a good chance that my children may never have an opportunity to meet either of their grandparents on my side. I don't have kids yet, but I feared that they would never have access to my mom's stories or her voice in the same way that they would never have access to my dad's. So we set out to change that. But I had this massive problem. I had absolutely no idea what to do. I was an amateur documentarian in high school, so I knew how to edit video. I knew how to ask questions, but I found myself completely overwhelmed by the number of steps that would be involved with capturing her stories. What to ask, how to ask it, how to edit the content, what devices to use to record it, and then how to share it across the family. Right. So we came up with a cobbled together solution that involved photographs from scrapbooks, involved questions from across the internet, and it involved reading a couple of books on the art and science of effective interviewing. And the experience, which was admittedly difficult to actually prepare for, proved to be of the most valuable times in my life. Like, that conversation brought my mom and I closer together than I ever could have imagined. And when we took that conversation, we cut it up and put it onto a private site and shared it with our family and friends. Like, we started receiving photos and videos and maps and music that brought all of that content to life. Right. And as we took that content and we shared it with those family and friends, I think we pretty quickly realized that the problem we had solved for my family, like, was not unique. Families everywhere are facing aging relatives, children and grandchildren who don't know them, and a life that too often encourages us to speed up and be productive, much more so than slow down and connect with those we care about. Not to mention a pandemic that over the last 2+ years has led to so many missed connections and missed moments with the people in life that matter so much to us. So that's why we have created Remento. That's why I'm doing this entrepreneurial pursuit, which is to make the solution that we created for my family available to yours too.
That I love that, because it reminds me. I stumbled across, especially with your documentary sort of background. We'll call it a background. I ran across somebody was doing something, going around and interviewing World War II veterans, in that same sort of sense of allowing them to tell their story. And what a great and powerful thing. And we tend to forget that, even in our own family, those stories are there. And, I think of, and I feel like every family that I know has that one family member who's the genealogy, person. Mine is our family. It's Aunt Carol, and she's over the years collected all these pictures and stories, and even took all the slides from my grandparents and converted them into digits. And yeah, it's a really cool sort of thing that I think you're right. If we know where we're coming from, then we're having so much more fuel to know where we're going. And I can hear the passion in your story about it. What was that? What was the biggest hurdle so far? Because I know it's still pretty new. And just going from, man, I believe in this, to, I don't know, first adopter, your early adopters.
Yeah. Well, we have spent so much time, like, over the last 2 years, trying to understand what kind of product we would need to create to get more families to do what I did with my family. And our thinking has really changed on that as we have gathered more research and more data to back up exactly why it is that people don't take the time to do more of exactly what we're talking about here. Like, why don't we all have more of what Aunt Carol has within us to, like, unpack the stories that made the people that we love who they are? And, like, one of the things that is such an aha moment for those of us who have taken the time to do that is learning the stories of those around us actually teaches us more about ourselves than we could ever imagine. But it's hard to see that until you've done it. So the biggest challenge for us has been trying to understand, why is it that more people don't take the time to do something that, once you have done it, you realize is so easy and also so meaningful, but for so many of us never breaks through the chaos and clutter of everyday life. So we spent a lot of time understanding what are the process frictions associated with why this is something that's intimidating. That often relates to things like not knowing what technology to use, not knowing how to edit the content, not knowing where to post the content once it's been created or how to share it. But also it involves unpacking some of the psychological frictions that get in the way too. People feeling like asking someone to share parts of their past would be an act of prying, right? There's modesty that gets in the way of both sides. Modesty on the part of our hosts who are asking questions, but then also modesty on the part of a storyteller who thinks sharing a story is an act of exhibition or vanity, when in reality, it is of the biggest gifts you could ever give to the person that you're sharing the story with. So breaking down all of the modesty that gets in the way of open and honest conversation, creating the conditions for psychological safety that can lead to vulnerable and authentic storytelling, right? And then also making sure that we have taken care of all of the process to make sure that it's super simple and easy to use. All of those, I would say, I think you asked for one challenge, and I think I just gave you about 15. So part of the challenge is also figuring out maybe what our biggest challenge is. But I would just say, as we think about our challenges, as many obstacles as there are, over the last year, we've been working with a group of beta users. And what's so special to see is that the experience that I had is not unique to me. It's like if we can get people to be a little bit more intentional, to pause, like others are able to have just as meaningful of an experience as I had with my mom. And it's a real gift to be able to be a part of a venture that's really trying to make a difference in that regard.
Do you have trouble stepping back into this like really high level, like philosophical, like stories are such an important fabric of, civilization and, us as humans, and, wanting to help like that individual story, and then also kind of jumping back into like the business mind of, laying out the processes and all those type of things. Do you have trouble bouncing back and forth with those? Because if I was a betted man, I would have bet that you spent the first 6 months or so on this project working with like 2 families and just spending an absurd amount of hours trying to go through those stories before you were like, oh my gosh, the processes need to be implemented at a better level. So do you have difficulty kind of bouncing from that, big picture philosophical, like how much value it's adding on an individual basis versus the business side of it's got to be scalable?
Yes, definitely. And the answer to that is yes.
And I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. Drops the mic. No, the answer is yes. And I would say one of the things that I learned as a speechwriter, which took a while to learn, but once I did, was of the most important things that I took away from the experience was that listening is the most effective way to be able to create things that are meaningful to others. Right. My job as a speechwriter was just listening to perspective and then basically spitting it out in a more concise way that allowed it to be connected to others. Right. Any of us who have given presentations know that that's exactly what communication is all about. Right. And what we have done with our team is exposed ourselves to 2 different audiences on a daily basis. The first is the people who actually use our product. Right. And to exactly the point that you raised, Cam, like, we're spending a huge amount of time learning about what these stories actually mean to them, how to tell better stories, and where the most value can be drawn from. But we've also spent a lot of time learning from a network of experts who reflect the best and the brightest as it relates to neuroscience and memory and professional storytelling, to actually understand what are the core tenets of memory and recall and story that we must be baking into the product experience so that our users can benefit from the best and brightest of art and science of effective interviewing. And the goal is it shouldn't feel like an academic experience. We're drawing on the best of academics, but the reality is that when you go through our product experience, the hope is that it feels like an extension of your mind and provides the guardrails if you need them for support, but never gets in the way of you having exactly the kind of conversation that you want to have with the person that you love.
So is there you said there's science. So the science, is it like how you ask the questions? Is it the type of question, or is it even something as cut and dry as trigger words, if you will, like, say this word and it triggers that kind of, what's that? Where's that kind of pull in together?
Yeah. How does the science connect to this?
Yeah.
So one of the things that our app does is it provides recommendations of exactly what to ask to different members of your family. So we know from our research that if you're speaking to a 50-year-old parent who has all of their photos at their fingertips from the last 15 or 20 years, you might have a very different conversation with them than if you're speaking with an 80-year-old relative with early onset Alzheimer's or a different form of dementia, right? And you would use very different kinds of prompts to instigate recall among those two different groups of people. Right. So what our app does is it provides very specific recommendations. Again, it's a jumping off point. It's a point of inspiration. Everything is customizable, but we'll provide recommendations for how to have that first conversation, how to have the second conversation, and how to have the 200th conversation. So part of it is providing specifics around what to ask. But then we also on our platform provide a lot of material on how to ask the questions. How do you lead into some of the more sensitive areas? How do you focus on questions that will provide specific details that we know are so important to really effective and meaningful storytelling? And then how, as a conversation host, can we be better, right? You all have done almost 200 of these podcasts, so simple questions are the ones that are most effective, right? Pause is incredibly powerful when it comes to drawing out that last little bit of information. So we spend a lot of time talking to people who do this professionally and trying to bake in recommendations into the product experience that bring out the best in the people who use it.
Do you see this specifically towards certain generations and like through that lens? Because you already mentioned the person has all the photos at the fingertips because they're in their 50s. It made me think immediately to jokes I've heard about closer to our generation, Charlie, where it's like we have so many pictures and Snapchats and Instagram posts and like all of this information that's out there. How do you see Remento playing into that in the bigger picture for like the younger generations that I wouldn't say have the storytelling, but we have a lot of the pieces probably a little bit more available?
We have a lot of the content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have tens of thousands of pieces of content. And I remember when I was sitting with my mom 5 years ago with a cancer diagnosis just behind us, right? I had 30,000 photos on my phone, 1,500 videos, right? I got married 6 weeks ago, right? And someone asked me for my favorite couple of photos. I have 3,000 of them. I couldn't find a photo to send, right? So it's in one regard, like the ubiquity of cameras in our lives has led to the creation of more content than ever. What a gift that is.
Mm-hmm.
But as we speak to people who are using our product, there's also this nostalgia for the Kodak camera that you had to take to CVS to get developed and only had a handful of photos. The curation happened because the amount of film that you had was finite, right? So part of what we're trying to do is recognize that in a world where our cameras are used to capture more than anything, more than any other time in history, like begs the question of, are we actually using these devices to capture what matters most? Mm-hmm. And when I couldn't find a video of my mom from the last 20 years taken on a digital device longer than 7 seconds, right? I realized that I probably was missing something. So part of what we're trying to do is inspire new generations to be able to use the devices at their fingertips to capture perhaps a different kind of content than we have spent time capturing. I can give you a quick example. When I was interviewing my mom, she shared a story of what it was like to be caught red-handed in middle school with a suitcase full of candy that she had stole from the nuns in her boarding school, right? That experience, it did not change her life, right? Mm-hmm. It did not shape the person she is today. But the smirk on her face as she tells that story, and knowing that I have that smirk preserved indefinitely, is as wonderful and special of a gift as I could ever imagine. I don't have
one of the things.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right.
Okay, so what that makes me think of, you're kind of talking about like using the camera like most effectively, kind of in the modern context of it. I think there's this interesting dilemma of like taking the picture so you have the memory versus being in the moment. And now to your credit, I think you very much solved that problem because you say be in the moment and then tell the story and record it later. Seems like the answer there. But what do you think about that barrier that the camera can create in those kind of moments? Do you think that it, I guess, net positive in the the big picture of like, containing those memories and that kind of stuff? Or do you think it's more important to be in the moment? And then, like I said, of course, I think the answer is then tell the story later, right?
Yeah. The first thing I think of is we've all been to concerts, or many of us have been to concerts recently, maybe not in the last couple of years, but where you see people staring at their devices, where they're actually watching the concert through the screen. And we can't help but feel like that video is never going to get watched. So you probably would have enjoyed the concert a lot more if you had just paid attention. Like, as we think about the conversations that we are trying to inspire with the product that we're building, the phone is going to be designed to capture the experience. It also is going to be used to facilitate the conversation. You use your phone in advance to plan a roadmap for the conversation. And then you use the phone to guide you through it. But outside of that, the phone sits to the side and the conversation is between two people. So I have strong opinions about the impact of ephemeral content creation on our society and how business models associated with attention and advertising have shaped the way that we interact with each other. We can talk more about that if you're interested. But I think as it relates to our product, what we're trying to do is make sure that the cameras at our fingertips and those devices can be used to bring families together, right? Rather than substitute our most important and cherished relationships.
And what it makes me think is back to, what you were saying earlier of, you only had the videos of your mom that were only 7 seconds long, of like just being more intentional with them. It makes me think back to my wife and I have been to a couple concerts this year. One of them was the band whose song was our first dance at our wedding last year. And I have a video of them doing like the opening piano riff for that. And it is awesome. And I'm so glad that we have that video. But then there's also about 5 or 6 other videos from that concert that I couldn't give, I don't care about at all, because it's like, it doesn't really have that same meaning. So I think intention is such a key lesson for that, as just like that your casual, actionable thing from today's conversation of just be a little bit more intentional with what you're taking pictures of and videos of, because if you get it of the right thing, it's going to have that huge amount of value. But then so much to your point, Charlie, if you're just sitting there, taking pictures every 5 minutes, you're not going to get the right ones. You're not going to have as much intention behind it because it's all about volume and, other people's perceptions of those type of things rather than what you're wanting to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, now that y'all said that so many times, I just gotta throw it out there. Epictetus saying that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. And let me see if I can pull Proverbs says God gave us really almost the exact same thing. Proverbs says God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more than we talk. Also, it's really when you think about those two Stoics and the Bible, there's a lot to be said there on the whole listening front. And you've touched on several things, Charlie, that I find interesting and reflect on me. The concert. I was at a concert. Was that just last Thursday night? I think it was. And small venue, and sure enough, there's people holding their phone up the whole time. And I'm just like, man. I mean, there was probably 100 people in the joint, and that's what they were doing. And I think the same thing. But I also get into that point, and I love the way that you're the perception that you're setting with the use of the camera, because I always have felt that to bring out the camera and capture the moment is intrusive, because for me, if I think to use the camera, then I'm no longer involved in the moment. And that's a perception that I have. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in that aspect of, oh yeah, let me pull the camera out while we're enjoying this moment to capture the moment. Then, there's some truth to that. But I'll circle it back around to the question I had, which is, who do you see as the primary user? The, you and Camden's demographic of, hey, what'd y'all do? I really want to know more. Or my demographic of, I better capture what the hell I've been doing for the last 50 some odd years, because them knuckleheads are going to want to know it at some point. So where does that lie for your focus?
Well, the good news is the product is built for both of you. So we have a selfie mode where if you want to record your own stories, that is totally something, Otis, you'd be able to use our platform to do. And we'll provide you with all sorts of different questions and opportunities to upload photos to be able to create something durable for the future. But I would say our primary use case is for those curious to better understand their own story through the story of someone else. Mm. So from the testing that we've done so far, we've seen all sorts of different people using the product, but there is a special resonance among one specific group, and those are people in what is called the sandwich generation. Those are the 60 million Americans who are sandwiched between a child of their own and an aging parent. And I don't have children of my own yet, but what we find when we talk to these people is when you have a child, there's something that awakens within you that makes you more curious than you were before about your own upbringing, and also places a premium on making sure that the memories and the stories of the person who can tell you about your upbringing are understood and preserved and protected. So we see that group of people using our product to take the guesswork out of exploring the memories and experiences that have shaped the lives of an aging relative. They are either using our tool to host a conversation themselves, or they are looping in their child, or potentially delegating the entire project to their child to actually have the conversation with the grandparent. So that's one group that has found a lot of resonance with what we're building. But I would say more generally speaking, we want to make sure that the technology that we're building is broadly applicable, that if someone has a story that they want to tell, or someone is interested in hearing the story of someone else, that the science and the storytelling expertise that is packaged within our product can be made useful to them.
I think
can you speak a little? Go ahead, Dad.
Let me jump on that real quick, because I think that's a really interesting point, and there's a larger space for that in the, whether it's estranged families or, I don't have any children or whatever it is. And just the ability of even an individual to, log into the app and use the app to capture the story there also. I think there's a really interesting aspect that who knows what that could look like and lead to in 100 years or 200 years.
Yeah, and that kind of builds on my question, actually, which could you just speak a little bit, Charlie, on like the value of the stories? I know we've kind of mentioned a few different aspects of it. There's so many different areas that I could see the value coming from, and I'm sure you have even more than have come up in the conversation already. Could you just speak a little bit on like the different values that you've seen show up?
Yeah, I think what has become clear. It's hard to answer this question in any way other than personally speaking, right?
That works.
I can point to the data about why storytelling matters and what makes a good story. But ultimately for me, all I can look to is what I have of my mom, right? Which was an opportunity to understand the person she is by way of the big and small moments that shaped that, which have helped me understand the person that I am today. And have informed the person that I want to become going forward. So what has been so special is, as we've tried to take the experience that shaped my life and my relationship with my mom and bring it into the lives of others, like we've seen similar value created in other families. We've seen barriers broken down across generations. We've seen connection that is created through curiosity. We've been reminded that learning does, in fact, start with listening. And we've seen families surprised and delighted by how rich and valuable it is to have an artifact created of this conversation. I would say the thing that we're just as excited about is that the recording of these conversations is actually just the beginning of the learning, right? So in my case, the recording that we created of my mom, of her talking about stealing candy in boarding school, which is a hilarious story, it led to engagement across our entire family. More questions, more reflections, more storytelling. And I think what our ambition is for our company is really to get out of the way and create opportunities for families to be able to explore, starting with in-person conversations, but then with time, create a digital space where families can come together and have the kind of connection that coming out of this pandemic, so many of us are hungry for, but don't exactly know how to achieve. It's clear, I think the world is a different place than it was 2.5 years ago. And if as we're coming back together for the first time, some of us in years, returning to the dinner table and talking about politics and weather and whatever else we talked about before this pandemic, like that may not be enough. So I think what we're so excited about doing is leveraging the technology that has changed the way we connected over the last 2 years and actually bring it to in-person conversations in a way that can really lead to a different level of connection.
Why do you think that people don't see the value? Like, is it just, I think we kind of talked about it earlier, of like, they just don't think they're as important. They don't think the stories are as important. And so they don't want to share them, or what is it? Because to me, it's like, there's so much value in the storytelling, but yet, whether it's somebody not wanting to tell their story because they don't think it's as important, or they, choose to spend their time talking about more current things that are little flash of the moment, like, politics or whatever. Where do you think those barriers come from, that they're not seeing that value?
So we spent a lot of time learning about this exact point. And at the end of the day, it's different for different families. We all have the relative who would love nothing more than to be honored with the gift of unlimited storage to record all of their stories, right? And we know people that would take every minute of that recording and make something amazing out of it. I think we also have family members who would say that my story doesn't matter, right? My story isn't important enough to be told. Why would you care? And I think as we reflect on those two different audiences, what we want to do is to build a muscle in families that places a priority on the learning that can come with the sharing. All right, we're not just asking people to tell stories for the sake of telling stories. We're not saying you have to have been a veteran or survived a genocide or have been a leader of a massive organization for your story to matter, right? What we are trying to say is that ultimately your lived experience and your perspective, no matter how important you deem it to be or unimportant, it matters to those around you. It will and has and can continue to shape their identities. And it's a story that's worth sharing.
That's great. And I've got a couple of them. But one of them I want to go back to. You've kind of touched on this, but what I'm really curious about, we've talked all about the capture of the story. Then how is that used going forward? And is it Christmas Eve? You sit down and almost like the old slideshows I used to sit through, or is it something else? How is it, I guess, digested, maybe just used once it's captured?
Yeah, so a big part of what we're doing with Remento, we're starting with the first experience. It's sitting down with someone that you care about, and it's capturing a story, 5 stories, 5 hours of stories, right? That's the first experience. And what we find is when that experience is shared, it leads to more curiosity and more questions. Right. So the actual video that is recorded using our technology is made available in the app, and it's easily exported for sharing across the family. I would say as we look to the future of what our app is going to be able to do, we want to create a living, breathing family history where these recorded conversations, these stories can become the foundation for a history that grows and evolves as our lives do. right? We like to think of the metaphor of a charm bracelet, right? If any of us have ever bought a charm bracelet for someone that we care about, it starts with one charm. And there's something perfect in the charm bracelet's incompleteness. It's completely and utterly valuable, and it becomes more valuable with time. Never finished, never complete, in the same way that our stories are never finished or complete. So the idea, to answer the question, is the first conversation is the catalyst for that first story being shared, that first set of stories being shared, but that with time, as life continues, we're able to accumulate more of these stories. We're able to accumulate more of the curiosity that fuels further exploration, and it becomes this really rich, beautiful composite of reflection and lived experiences.
I'm hearing something that, and this may be, well, I'll just throw it out there as is. I hear the potential for a tool to search the stories to identify a history input, if you will. So you use your mom's story of the school that she went to, and if there was, they wanted to just capture the history of folks from that school and some fun stories. Is that something that you've given some thought to, where, and I mean, I guess I'll call it like a third party would come in. I mean, you're even just your app doing it within your app, but a third party to the family could screen it somehow and say, hey, that story would be really cool with this thing we're doing over here.
The short answer is yes, we've thought about that. We definitely have. And it's a great idea, and it's incredibly exciting. The thing that we're most focused on doing right now is accumulating intimate media with an emphasis on privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So every piece of content that's recorded on the device is stored locally and shared if the person who has captured the content decides to share it. Right. So that's the first and most important thing that I want to hammer home, which is when we speak with customers, there's a worry of, in the digital age, what happens to my story once it's actually been captured? And for our app, it is, until otherwise made explicit, completely private. Now, that being said, there is, of course, extremely exciting and potential value in starting to create connections across families, right? And across themes and across moments in history. So we can imagine being able to accumulate reflections about a school, about a moment in time, about a geography, making them searchable, making them indexable, right? We have this exciting and grand notion of being able to, the day after a presidential election, not have to listen to the journalists that we love and respect so deeply, but actually be able to understand what voters in Pennsylvania were actually thinking by being able to zoom in on a map and actually listen to their perspective. And I love the idea of 2 ears and one mouth. And so much of our time now is spent talking, much more so than listening, right? So if we can give people the resources to listen more and talk less, like, we think that's a key to empathy, right? So thinking about ways that once this content has been created, it can be shared, at first within the family, but then potentially beyond. That's something that we're definitely considering. And of course, we want to make sure that we're doing so in a way that's consistent with what our users are telling us they expect.
When you talk about telling the family story, one of the things I've been kind of thinking about is you are limited in the sense of, with living relatives, right? That, we can't really go back that much further. I think it's a 23andMe right now that's their big sale point, is that they're connecting you with like historical articles. It might be one of the other, DNA companies, but it's like connecting your family back to these historical articles that your great grandpa did that you might not know about. It makes me think of, Dad, with Aunt Carol. I think I got this right. We had a great uncle that got shot by Davy Crockett or something along those lines, challenged him to a duel of the sandbar. I know the name of it. I don't remember who it was, but some Texas royalty shot one of our relatives. So I guess that makes us famous. But the interest,
I remember right.
Okay, there we go.
There's probably another great or two in that group.
That's right. Have you looked at all as far as to how to expand that more historically? Because we've talked a lot about going forward, what it looks like, and I see so much value there. But then, as you're talking about the value that you get from these stories and knowing your family's story, there's also so much in retrospect that's there. Have you thought at all about how to tie that in?
Yeah, we definitely have. And I would say we are deeply inspired by other companies that are helping people understand themselves by way of those who came before them. Right? You mentioned 23andMe, companies that are helping us build a family tree through genealogical exploration, companies that are helping us curate photo books or create accumulations of one-off written reflections. I would say fundamentally, though, and my experience has informed the way that I think about this, there is so much more to understanding the family story than could ever be captured on a birth certificate or a photograph or a written reflection. And there's so much value in learning that together, right? Not just the who, the what, the when, and the where, but also the why and the how come to, right? Like not only knowing that someone you love was a Green Beret who traveled to France and Bosnia, but hearing about that experience in their own words. That is just as, if not, I would say, tremendously more valuable. And that's something that these companies that are focused on DNA and facts haven't been able to crack yet. Mm-hmm. So there is clearly an opportunity for us to connect the non-fact-based collection of information with the facts, and we're going to explore that going forward. But there is such a glaring and massive opportunity for technology that helps us capture the other side, that we are hard charging against that priority. And I'd say maybe once we've solved that completely and thoroughly, we can branch out into other areas as well.
You mentioned fact-based there, and this is a question I got to admit, I wasn't sure if I wanted to ask this, but it kept on popping up in the back of my mind, is the uncle, the aunt, the cousin who's just BS. And how do you approach that from a process standpoint? Like, are you comparing stories between the two uncles about the fight that broke up the family and you're fact checking which one really said what to who? Or, I guess that's just when I think about telling a family story, there's got to be some biases in there. So I'm interested in how you approach that.
You're right. Memory is unreliable. It is. And we have plenty of science to back that up. We've worked with experts who tell us just how unreliable memory is. And actually, ironically, some of our most important stories, the ones that we tell the most, are the least true based on the number of times we've told them. Because what we've learned through the research is that the more you tell a story, every single time it's told, the actual efficacy, the accuracy of the details fades away. It becomes more like the last time you told it and the last time you told it. What our company is not trying to do, though, very importantly, is to create artifacts for the Smithsonian. Yeah. That's not what this business is about. This business is about capturing the essence of a person by way of reflections on lived experiences that tell us who they are, right? We celebrate the bias. We celebrate the inaccuracies. And when they lead to conversations that are interesting and provocative, we celebrate that too. Right? But we never want someone to feel intimidated by the fact that maybe their memory of an experience isn't perfect. Right? In fact, a big part of our audience is people who have limited capacity to remember the accuracy of moments from their life. And yet, what would we rather have? A biased version of a story or no story at all? So the whole point is do it now, because there's never going to be a better time to capture more accurate, more specific, and more meaningful storytelling than today, than tomorrow, than this holiday season.
And that fish that I caught has gotten bigger and bigger.
Oh yeah, it has.
Well, it makes me think, before you go down, I was just going to, add on to that. It makes me think I heard this, these comedians talking about that. I think they were, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Shirtless guy does the machine story. Bert Kreischer. There we go. But he talks about how it's like, he tells that story for a living now, and it changes each time he tells a story, because it's like, Oh yeah. Well, when I tell it how it actually happened, nobody laughed at that part. I could tell everyone tuned out in that 2 minutes where I was
Exactly.
talking about the math test that I was taking. It's like, maybe cut out the math test. Maybe instead of the math test, I ditched and went to a bar. And it's like not even necessarily, to that level of like trying to add excitement to it in like a lying type of way, but more so just like trimming the fat, just like you would with anything else. You want to be entertaining. That's a big piece of the storytelling.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this a couple of times about the life lessons and things like that that you learn, and people who use the tool will learn. What's something that you learned in having that, going through that process with your mother?
Mm. One of the things that was so clear as we went through this conversation with my mom was um, the amount of strength and resilience that has defined moments of her life. So she became a single mom in 2001 by no act of her own choosing. And it was through the process of asking some questions that were specifically about that moment, but many other seemingly random questions that had nothing to do with 2001, that we came to better understand what it was like to make that transition for her. Um, so as we learned about the earlier part of her life, it informed how we understood she was prepared to take on that new responsibility. And in the years after she took on that responsibility, the questions that we asked informed how she faced the realities of this new life. So I would say that the biggest learning from those conversations was not only appreciating the strength and resilience of my mom, but understanding just how actually strong she had to be, and how her doubts and how her doubts made her actually stronger along the journey, and actually made her feel to me in some ways more human than I actually ever thought she was. We idolize our parents. Some of us do. Some of us have other relationships with our parents, and we are agnostic to the kind of relationship that you have with the person that you want to have a conversation with. But I would say overall, like, the big stories, but also the small stories from this conversation with my mom, they created a level of empathy and understanding for her that has made it so that I can never look at her the same way.
How has that changed the way that you look at your life going forward?
Mm. The answer is it certainly has. It certainly has.
Mm.
I think what's clear to me is, as someone who's recently married and planning to have kids of my own, I'm reminded of what an incredible sacrifice it is to have a child of your own, right? But also what a tremendous opportunity is to be able to instill so much of your own lived experiences and learnings into the lives of someone else, right? And I actually don't think I realized until I had these conversations with my mom, like, how intentional she was about the way she raised us. I think as a kid, you feel it's just natural. Everything happens in the way that you would expect it to. You don't know anything else. But to actually sit with my mom and ask her, what were you worried about when you raised us? What were the things you feared we might not understand about the world around us? Right? It led us to realize how intentional she was with the way she thought we needed to develop our thinking. So I would say, whether you're talking to a parent before you have kids, or I imagine this will only become more valuable once you have kids of your own, but this level of openness and vulnerability on both sides, like, it informed the way that I want to exist in this world, which is more willing to ask questions, more open to hearing the answers, and wanting to make sure that we create opportunities for others to be able to do the same.
What I keep falling back to is, and I'll formulate the question as I ramble on here. Is the campfire, the sitting around even just not, you don't even have to go back to the campfire age. I mean, just, 60, 70 years ago, probably 80 years ago. We'll go back before radio. So we'll say 100 years ago. All right, there we go. I got a time frame for us. 100 years ago, when the only entertainment was the person sitting across from you or a book you picked up. And I'm sure you can validate this. There's studies out there that say we all learn better through stories, as opposed to here's the data, memorize that and go use it. Let me paint a picture of the story of that, and then it sticks in our mind. How can you, with Rement, compete with all the other attention grabbers in our life now, from the social media to the streaming services to whatever else is there? How do you compete with that?
Yeah. I think a lot of us are very nostalgic about those campfire conversations, right? And I think it's actually easier to bring this product to market than it ever has been, in part because of how obvious it is to so many of us coming out of this pandemic that we are hungry and eager for deeper and more meaningful connection. Like, everything about our world has changed, and it's not going back to the way it was. It seems quite clear. So I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to harness this eagerness for rethinking what connection means in the digital age and create a pathway for people to find what was so special about those campfire conversations and integrate it into their lives. So for us, the challenge is related to making it easy and accessible and utterly delightful, right? Because we know that there's nothing exciting about a long-term homework assignment or creating an entire legacy of someone's life. But what we learn is that we don't have to do either of those things. One story is better than no stories, right? It starts with one. I guarantee that first one is going to be a total delight for you to be able to experience.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking, I don't remember doing this as a kid, but I remember my kids doing this in school. I want to say it was like 5th or 6th grade. They had to do some sort of research paper on their family. Now they just got to go in and do a little keyword search on Remnant. Rement. Sorry, I got the wrong word on Rement, and then boom, there it is. So kids, for your homework assignment in 5th or 6th grade, talk to mom and dad about getting on Rement and capturing.
And the thing I just add on, the thing that we see is, like, these kids have become the CTOs of their family in the last 2 years, right? They're running the shop. They are. And what's so exciting is these kids know more about finding information in pockets of the internet than any other group in our society, right? So what we find is that when you learn the story of what it was like to steal candy from a boarding school in Canada, which is where my mom went to school, like, the 13-year-old kid who's in 6th or 7th grade is actually able to find the yearbook photos, the map that shows where that school was, potentially other people that were involved through Facebook and other types of connections. And it creates this entire exploratory world where what we're doing is we're not capturing a time capsule to be unlocked in the future, but we're creating this pathway for exploration that becomes much more rich and valuable in the very short term.
It's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for where this is going to go. And Odie, when you're listening to this, our Camden's nephew, my grandson, who is now 2 months old, something like that. Yeah, when you're listening to this, there, guy, make sure you're capturing those stories, little buddy. So, man, I'm gonna. What I learned, and I thought it really struck home with me because I found it personally ironic. And it was something you said early on about speech writing. and how a good speechwriter is such a good listener. I never thought about it that way in that sense, because it's so true. Because if you don't put yourself in the audience's shoes to how does this resonate? How will they hear it? Then all you're doing is blah, 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 and writing that. And that's that's a really important thing to think about. I believe, for all of us, whether you're on the stage giving a speech, or you're on a podcast or anywhere else, is how does the person on the other end of it hear what I'm saying? And I like that. And that was a big one for me. And I'm going to stew on that over the weekend, I think, for a while. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I'm going to have to double up because I think mine was a little too similar, but I had listening is the most effective way to connect with others. Charlie, you said that early on. And yeah, that's so big, of just how important the listening aspect is to the conversation. You can never overstate how important that is. But since you already kind of had listening there, Dad, what I wanted to add on it was the bias of the storytelling not being a bad thing. That it's like, yeah, you add a little bit of extra emotion, a little extra excitement. It's not moving a story so far from the truth, and it makes it, more fun for the person telling the story, more fun for the person they're engaging with, and makes it a little bit more memorable. So maybe have a little bit of bias in those stories isn't too bad.
How about you, Charlie? What'd you learn?
Well, I loved hearing about Aunt Carol, and I think we all have Aunt Carols in our families, the people who have rolled up their sleeves and taken this upon themselves to be the family historian, right? So it's exciting to know that you have someone like that in your family. And it's exciting for us to know that we're hopeful to be able to make more of us like Aunt Carol's, to give us the tools to make it way easier to be able to do exactly what you say, which is exercise the 2 ears on our head much more so than the one mouth that we've got. And it was great to know that there's a biblical reference to that as well. So that was my learning.
Awesome. Well, Charlie, how do folks follow you, learn more about what's next, how to become a beta user, or maybe a regular old user?
We're going to be fully out of beta. So you can visit our website, which is remento.co. It's a made up word, so I'm going to go ahead and spell it just for our audience. It's REMENTO, a combination of the words remember and memento. You can download the app for free on the Apple App Store. We're available for iPhones right now, with Android coming just shortly down the pike. And one of my favorite things to do is to connect with folks for whom any part of what we are doing resonates. So if there's a part of what we're doing that's interesting, you can just shoot me a note. It's charlie@remento.co.
Awesome, man. Well, this has been great, and yeah, touched a few heartstrings I could feel as we were talking, and brought back some awesome memories for myself. I really appreciate your time today, Charlie.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Charlie Greene, for joining us today. And of course, our sponsor, Tribe and Purpose. Find your tribe, find your purpose. Get started for free today at findyourpurpose.coach. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Instagram and Facebook, and please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Videos of the podcast are on our YouTube page, and you can always get a full archive of our episodes at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.